start with the speaker that's not physically here, and this is somebody who worked, had her Masters of Commerce from the Vienna University of Economics and Business, and she's been a project manager at the Austrian Research Promotion Agency, and in the Division of European and International Programs since 2004. She has foresight experience as a project partner and as a collaborator in the Foresight and Gamification Working Group for long-term policy making towards China in the framework of the Horizon 2020 program, Dragon Star Plus. And she was also a project partner in also a Horizon 2020 project called Future Proof, for which strategic foresight is used for designing new services corresponding to future needs of small and medium-sized enterprises. So, Elli, you're going to talk about corporate futures and Doughnut economics. I'm not going to give a brief summary of your talk before we start. I'm sure I'm looking forward to hearing it all from you. Just for the technical part, if you need the slides to change, please say next or next slide, and our wonderful technicians at the back in the room here will change the slide for us, and we will see hopefully what you intend for us to see. Thank you, Elli. I'm passing the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Maya. Guten Morgen nach Berlin. I hope you can hear me. I do see my slide. I hope you see my slides as well, and you can hear me. So thank you for the introduction. I'm very honored to be part of the World Future Studies Federation conference today, and I'm very sorry not to be in person with you there. So on my next slide, you can see that I will be trying to answer three main questions. Why do we need climate action now? So where do we stand right now? How shall we react and reach our new goals? Which standards and metrics do we have? And what can futures thinking contribute? How could corporate futures look like? So on my next slide, you will see an infographic made by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This panel is the United Nations body for assessing the science related to climate change, and they had a recent report on climate change 2021, which reaffirms that there is very high confidence that there is a near linear relationship between cumulative anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions and the global warming that we see and that they cause. So it is evidence and it is fact that each of the last 4 decades has been successively warmer than the decade before. And the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change urges and raises awareness to the so-called climate ambition gap. So they argue to close this climate ambition gap, which is the gap between what really needs to be done right now and what we are currently doing. It is the gap between hope and inaction, the gap between a healthier future and climate catastrophe. So this report I'm talking about is a result of 234 authors from 66 countries and 500 and more contributing authors, and it is based on over 14,000 cited references. So all these results they came up with are really on a global evidence base, and their main message is that human influence was very likely the main driver of global surface temperature rise of 1.1 degrees Celsius that we are facing right now, and also the increase of global sea level by 3.7 millimeters per year. And if we see this relationship, it implies that reaching net zero anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions is a requirement to stabilize human-induced global temperature increase. So on my next slide, you will see the 5 scenarios, the 5 emission scenarios that came as a result of this report. Having a look at the most optimistic scenario in light blue, this scenario describes a world where the global carbon dioxide emissions are cut to net zero year 2050. Societies switch to sustainable practices. They shift from economic growth to overall well-being. Investments in education and in health go up. Inequality falls. And we do face extreme weather, but we have avoided the worst impact of climate change in this scenario. And this is also the scenario, and it is the only scenario that meets the Paris Agreement's goal of keeping global warming at around 1.5 degrees Celsius. In the next best scenario, we do have a global CO2 emissions cut, but not as fast as in the first scenario. So it will be after the year 2050. But this scenario imagines the same socioeconomic shifts towards sustainability with a stabilized temperature increase of around 1.8 degrees Celsius. Yeah, in every scenario they came up with, warming will continue for at least a few decades, and the sea levels will continue of sea ice in at least one summer in the next 30 years. But yeah, looking at the worst case scenarios, these two in dark red, as you see, these two scenarios foresee a temperature rise between 4 and 5 degrees Celsius, and this makes the planet not inhabitable for humans anymore. So when we have a look at the next slide, please. Yeah, how quickly the sea will rise, and how dangerous the weather extremes might get still in the next years is really up to which future we choose and which path we take, and how can we do that? So we have everything in our pockets right now. In 2017, Kate Raworth designed her Doughnut economics, her alternative economic model. You see here on the right-hand side, it is a so-called Doughnut with a ceiling, an ecological ceiling, an outer ring that stands for Earth's environmental ceiling, and the collective use of resources has an adverse and negative impact on the planet if we overshoot it. On the inner part, it is the social foundation, an inner ring that represents a series of minimum socioeconomic standards, and these are based on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. If you click once for the next slide, the Sustainable Development Goals will come into this slide. And yeah, talking about this Doughnut economics, which is a really new and, let's say, not so old model. During the pandemic, Amsterdam was the first city to adopt already Doughnut economics. The city mayor decided to work together with city policymakers to find solutions for the expensive housing in Amsterdam, for poverty, and also for the high increase in urban carbon dioxide emissions. And soon after Amsterdam, Barcelona, Brussels, and Copenhagen also decided to embrace Doughnut economics and implement it in their cities. So if we go to the next slide, which can you just press once again? We can look here at the situation where we stand now. So when we have looking at the inner ring, at the social foundation, at the socioeconomic standards, globally seen, we have a shortfall everywhere in all the standards. And if we have a look at the ecological ceiling, we do have the climate crisis that we know all the facts about. We also were threatened by a biodiversity loss. Just to give you some figures regarding biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation, since 1970, Latin America and the Caribbean had a 94% biodiversity loss. So far, in Africa, it is 65%. In Asia Pacific, 45%. North America, 33%. And in Europe, and Central Asia, we face 24% loss of biodiversity. And currently, there are some results and some figures. Currently, 1 million of total estimated 8 million animal and plant species are threatened by extinction if we do not take immediate action. To the next threat, the land conversion. 3/4 of the Earth's land surface has been altered by human interaction, by humans. 1/3 alone in the last 6 decades since 1960. And regarding nitrogen and phosphorus loading, we face freshwater vertebrate populations having declined by 86% since 1970. This is twice the rate experienced within terrestrial or marine ecosystems. So the future might be colorful, as Ezra said, but we really need to act now, and we really need to join forces now. In my next slide, you see how we can do this. It is evident that business as usual is not acceptable anymore. It is not an option anymore and not acceptable. So a divisive and degenerative economy, which is built on maximizing profit and only on growth as ultimate metric, is obsolete and really counterproductive. So we definitely need immediately a fair, distributive and regenerative economy, which is supported by and harnessed by disruptive innovation, as Kate Raworth describes it in her book. So we do have also new metrics. We have the so-called environment, social and governance metrics, the ESGs, which cover factors related to people, to planet, to prosperity, and to principle of governance. And 10 of these ESGs are common for and most relevant to private equity investors. And also the World Economic Forum is encouraging businesses to include ESG metrics in their corporate and financial reportings. I just want to mention 2 or 3 of these. Which metrics are we talking about? It is, let's say, a presence of an environmental policy that businesses implement. It is the number of health and safety events, and another example, the diversity among employees. So these metrics are in our pocket, and we do have them. It is just about to use them and to change our economic system. So how can we join forces? How can we use synergies and connect? I give a couple of examples here. We have the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, for instance, which is designed and embracing a lot of stakeholders and stakeholder groups which work together. They are developing a well-being vision and framework that reflects local values, objectives, and context. They are designing a well-being economy strategy that identifies the areas of economic life most important for our well-being. They are assessing and selecting well-being economy policies by aligning with well-being values and goals. They are implementing well-being economy policies which empower communities to take the lead in this transformation process, and evaluating policy impacts on well-being for learning and adaptation and for using. On my next slide, I give another example. It is the Equitable Enterprise Initiative, which in fact replaces the value for shareholders of businesses by community well-being. They argue that social responsibility of business lies to maximize equitable distribution of economic returns from its activities. So we have examples on my next slide. You will also see see what we as foresight experts, as futures thinkers can do. We can, as Ezra said, build scenarios and include our knowledge and our imagination and build futures built on different economic paradigms and models. So I found this one. Doing business in 2030, where 2 of the 4 scenarios were built on a new economic system. One scenario, I will shortly describe it to you. One scenario is built on an economy that should serve widespread human flourishing on a thriving climate-stabilized planet. This scenario foresees, that's interesting, in the Nordic bloc, that consumers want products that have been ethically sourced, produced in a way that positively benefits people and the environment, and that is designed for circularity. Regarding energy, this scenario is about offshore wind and solar that are the cheapest forms of electricity, for example. And the second scenario, also built on a new alternative economic paradigm, is about networks of smaller, cohesive, and largely autonomous communities, which seem to be the most resilient to socioeconomic drivers of change. And this scenario foresees that local and regional businesses, especially worker cooperatives, have exploded in popularity, and ecosystems of small and medium enterprises have emerged. It foresees equity crowdfunding that is unlocking a large stream of capital from civil society to invest in startups and in businesses in their communities. And also they foresee city and regional climate policies, so on a city level. So I find this very interesting. And on my next slide, I just want to mention also, because yesterday in the plenarium, the experts and the speakers were talking about the European Union. The European Union has published its 5 missions recently. They are also built on foresight exercises. These missions are tackling cancer, they are tackling climate resilience, tackling oceans and waters, climate neutral and smart cities, and also healthy soils. So what can we as foresight community do? We can definitely raise awareness about the socioeconomic drivers of change, promote sustainable and healthy lifestyles. We can bring together the needed stakeholders from governance, economy, environment, and society, and tackle and replace short-term thinking and provide businesses and policymakers with long-term perspectives, with roadmaps, with resilience pathways and scenarios. We can inspire and unlock creativity and empower the civil society through co-creation and co-design processes, involving them in the building and in the co-creation, in the solutions, trigger co-ownership and work towards preferred corporate futures. We can definitely explore different scenarios, as was mentioned, and narratives, and trigger corporate responsibility and individual identification in these narratives. And last but not least, accelerate action and transformation towards a joint clear vision. And we have this clear vision. We don't want the worst case scenarios. We want the best case scenario, and we want a just future. So on my next slide, I summarized all my sources and the links I'm providing for you to if you want to read into them. And I'm also highlighting the UN, the 26th Climate Change Conference of the parties in Glasgow, which will kick off end of the month, if you want to follow and see what the results and the decisions will be. So that's my part, and I want to thank you, and I hope you heard me, and it was an inspiring presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elli. I think that thanks so much. You will be able to follow the rest of the session here. I think we will do questions and conversation after we heard all 3 presentations.